Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Sandra of Nomad Stitches, and today we are going to dive deep into a slip stitch ribbing. Now this is my favorite kind of ribbing for a few reasons. One, it is very elastic, and two, it is very pretty. I know you think it might be a lot of work because of slip stitches, but hopefully today I will help you figure out what's the best way to make it, to keep it nice and simple, and to keep your stitches as loose as possible so that you can work into them in following rows. So stick around so that you can learn all these tips and tricks to make a perfect slip stitch ribbing without any hassle. Alright, so the first thing you need to consider when making a slip stitch ribbing is the weight of yarn that you are using and the hook that you will use as well. In this case, I am using DK weight yarn, and I will use a 4.5mm hook. You can even go up to a 5mm hook. Keep in mind that the larger the hook that you use, the looser and more elastic that your ribbing will be, which will also have less structure. Okay, so it's up to you. Are you looking for very stretchy long ribbing, or are you looking for a more structured ribbing? Then you should go down a hook for more structure and thicker ribbing, or you should go up a hook for looser, lighter, stretchier ribbing. It's really up to you. So we will start with a chain with as many stitches as you want your ribbing to be. This will determine the width of the ribbing. Okay, keep in mind that a chain will always be longer than your actual work after you've worked a few rows. So if this feels very long, that's okay, because it will shrink as you work the rows on it. And if it feels very short, then you should definitely work a few more rows, a few more stitches. And then you are going to chain one extra to have that height for the stitches. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's important that you know how many stitches you will be working with so that you can count as you go, because it's very easy to lose a stitch with this kind of ribbing. Now, the easiest thing to do to make it really neat is to work on the back bump of your chain. So instead of working on these loops at the front, you're going to work on the back bump of the chain. So we're going to skip the first one because that's our turning chain. We're going to go to the next one and work a slip stitch ribbing right there. Now, this is one of the biggest tricks that I can give you, is when you are working with slip stitches, if you hold on to your work at the back and simply slip your hook past, that will make the stitches nice and loose, which is really what you want for a slip stitch pattern. You see, nothing has been tightened, everything is nice and loose, and I just hold on to my work at the back and pull through. Okay, so I'm going to work a slip stitch all the way to the end. So this is my very first row of slip stitch ribbing. I will chain one and work slip stitches all the way back, but only on the back loop. So here are my two loops of a stitch. The one that is farther away from me is the back loop. The one that is closer to me is the front loop. So we're going to leave the front loop unused, unworked, and we're only going to work on the back loop of every stitch. The first one is my chain for turning. That's my turning chain. So I'm going to work in the next slip stitch. And again, hold on to it at the back and I simply slip through. Another really useful tip is, instead of going in with the tip of your hook, you're going to go with the lip, this little bit. You see how that opens so much more space? Now, not always. Sometimes the stitches are wide enough so you can go with the front, with the tip, but other times it's so much easier to make room by going in with this bit. Let me show you again. In, slip, in, hold on at the back, slip, hold on at the back and slip. Now see, at the end it's a little bit unclear of where the end is, and this is where counting comes really handy. So 1 2 3 4 5 7 8 9. If you don't want to count, then what you can do is carry a marker on this last stitch to make it nice and obvious which is the last stitch of the row. And then you're going to go back and do the same thing, slip stitch on the back loop only, all the way to the end of the row. And you're going to do this as many times as your pattern indicates. As you can see, my stitches are big enough for me to enter with the tip at the moment because I've been leaving them very loose. But sometimes, especially towards the end, I see this one at the end, it's a little bit wonky. So instead of going with my tip, I will go with the lip. And there you go. I will work a few more rows and then show you what it looks like after a while and how I join it to make a circle, for example at the neckline or a cuff. All right, another thing that's important to mention is that you see the edging looks a little bit different on this side than on this side. This one kind of goes in and this one kind of flips out. Same on the other side. This one goes in and this one flips out. That's because of the direction in which I turn. I always turn in the same direction, which means that when I do this, the edge will kind of flip backwards. And then when I get to the end, I chain one and then I turn again in the same direction. Again, I am putting my yarn backwards, which means that this edge will kind of round backwards. So when I finish, I will just choose the side that I like to be on the right side. For example, if I like this one to be the edging of the neckline, then I will make sure that this stays on the outside so that my neckline looks like this instead of this. Another thing that you can do is simply twist in the other direction. Instead of twisting so I finish my row, instead of going in this direction so that my yarn is backwards, I can twist in the other direction so that my yarn is forward at the front. By doing that, this edge will turn in the other direction and they both will look the same. So for example, you can turn to the right on one side and to the left on the other side, and that will make both ends look in the same direction. In this case, one looks upwards and the other one downwards because I'm always turning in the same direction. I hope that makes sense and that helps understand why it looks different. All right, so I have quite a bit of ribbing now, and you can already see how elastic this is and also how structured it is. It's quite dense. That's because a 4.5mm hook and this yarn, which is quite woolly, creates this really nice fabric. If I had used a bigger hook, maybe my ribbing wouldn't have as much structure, which would make it very loose and maybe not the best for a neckline. So I think this is a perfect one for a neckline so that the weight of the pullover doesn't stretch it out too much. So now that I have finished, I'm going to join them, which is what we would do if we are working a cuff or a neckline. So what you're going to do is that you're going to join on the wrong side. You're going to join the last worked row with your starting chain. Now this is the moment where you choose what you want this to look like on the right side. So see here, this goes in and I really like that. But this also goes in and I like that too. So if I join my row here, I will finish over here and this is where I will continue my sweater, which means that I want this looking downwards to be my right side. So I will close it with my right side on the inside and I will join on the wrong side. Okay. So to join, we're going to join the outer loop. So you see how there are 2 loops on the stitch? We're going to go to the one that is farther away from me. In this case, it's the back loop. And we're going to join our starting chain, which is on this side. Okay, so we're going to start on this side. 1 loop from my starting chain and the back loop from my last row, and make that nice and tight. Not too tight, just a normal slip stitch. 1 of the chain, 1 of the last row. The reason why we are using the outer loop of the last row is so that that front loop leaves a little ridge on the right side. Otherwise, it will leave just a dip, which won't look as nice. So this is my wrong side, and I'm going to do 1 more chain and tighten that one so that I can turn this around and show you that join. So it doesn't look exactly the same as everything else because this has 2 loops and this has 2 loops and this join only has 1, but it's not very obvious at all, and I think it looks quite nice. In my patterns, I usually have you work a setup row on the edge of your ribbing. So this is how I do it. You see how there's a dip, bump, dip, bump. So I will work 1 stitch on the dip and 1 stitch on the bump. So on the dip, I try to catch 2 strands of yarn every time, 2 strands. And then on the bump, I try to go in between that V. You see it's almost closed off, so you just have to push your way in and do your stitch there. That makes that V a lot prettier, and it matches with the stitch that you just made, which looks really, really nice on a neckline, for example. And then at the dip, again, I look for two strands. It's a little bit harder and it's not so obvious. So if you can only get 1 strand of yarn, that's okay. The problem with doing 1 strand is that you can leave a little hole, but it's not usually very obvious on a ribbing. And then again, I try to find that V. There it is. And I work my stitch there. And I do that all the way around. Now, depending on the number of rows you worked, is the number of stitches that you will have on this last setup row. If you, for example, worked more rows of ribbing because you felt like it was too narrow, then just make sure that you skip a few rows when you're doing the setup row so that you have the right amount of stitches like the pattern calls. So you can either skip them or you can do single crochet 2 together and join a dip with a bump and distribute them around the whole circumference so that they're not very obvious. But to be honest, this ribbing is so stretchy that I've never had to add any extra rows to any of my patterns because it always stretches out, especially at the neckline. There's always so much give to it. All right. And the last one, this is supposed to be a bump, but I didn't do an even number of rows, so this is what happened. That's okay. And then I will join my row with a slip stitch. And now I can work on this edging as normal and follow the pattern. So there you go. That's my favorite slip stitch ribbing. If you are looking to know how to add a ribbing to an existing piece of fabric, I have another video where I talk about that and it's linked over here. So you can just go over there and learn how to do it the other way around. Now remember what I was telling you about the right side looking downwards? You see that edging is so nice and neat, and it kind of looks down instead of having that lip upwards. But if I turn it upside down, that lip is upwards here, and it's not as neat. I mean, it's such a small detail, but it can make a difference if you pay attention. All right, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.